The divorce papers hit my desk. I stared at them, hands shaking. The handwritten note attached said, "You'll never change, Arnold. You care more about your image than your family. I'm done waiting." She was right. I had become someone I didn't recognize. The gym consumed every waking moment. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, bedtime stories. I justified it all as building a legacy, but I was just running from something I couldn't name. My empty mansion that night was silent. I walked through rooms that once had laughter, and found only cold marble floors. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed a stranger, hollow eyes, stress lines, a man who had everything but felt empty. I poured myself a protein shake and sat surrounded by trophies that suddenly felt meaningless. The phone rang constantly, sponsors, agents, training partners, but I let them all go to voicemail. For the first time in years, I didn't care about the next competition. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying moments from our marriage, seeing clearly how I'd prioritized everything else over the woman who loved me. She had begged me to slow down, to be present, to remember what mattered, but I was too proud, too driven, too convinced that I knew better. The worst part wasn't losing her, it was knowing she was right about me never changing. I had tried before, made promises I couldn't keep, started strong, only to fall back into old patterns. The cycle always repeated. Good intentions, brief improvement, then right back to the same destructive habits. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete helplessness, all my strength, all my discipline, all my determination, and I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. I couldn't fix myself. 3 months after the divorce, I was wandering downtown Venice Beach at midnight. Sleep had become my enemy, and the empty mansion felt like a prison. I walked aimlessly, hoping physical exhaustion would quiet the noise in my head. I saw him sitting on a bench outside a small church, reading a worn book under the streetlight. Something about his presence made me stop. He looked up as I approached and his eyes held a peace I hadn't seen in anyone for years. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice gentle but knowing. I almost kept walking. I'm not the type to open up to strangers, especially not at midnight on a random street corner, but something in his tone made me pause. "You could say that." He patted the bench. "I'm Father Miguel. Been sitting here for 30 years, watching people walk by with that same look you've got." I sat down, though I couldn't explain why. "What look is that?" "The look of a man who's got everything he thought he wanted, but realizes it's not enough. The look of someone who's tired of trying to fix himself and failing every time." His words hit like a punch to the gut. How could this stranger see so clearly what I'd been hiding from everyone? "I used to be angry all the time," Father Miguel continued. "Angry at my ex-wife, angry at my kids for not understanding me, angry at the world for not giving me what I deserved. Spent 20 years bitter and alone, convinced everyone else was the problem." "What changed?" Father Miguel smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was the quiet smile of someone who had found something real. "I stopped trying to change myself and let someone else do it." "Someone else?" "Jesus." He said it simply, without preaching. "I know how that sounds to someone like you. Trust me, I would have laughed 30 years ago if you'd told me the same thing." I wanted to leave. Everything in my rational mind screamed that this was religious nonsense I'd always dismissed, but something kept me on that bench. "How do you know someone like me?" Father Miguel chuckled. "Because I was someone like you, strong, successful, thought I was master of my own universe, had every reason to believe I could figure out life on my own. But you can't change a heart that's broken from the inside, no matter how disciplined you are." The words settled into my chest like stones. I sat there in silence, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood. This man I'd known for 10 minutes had seen through every wall I'd built. "What did you mean about letting someone else change you?" Father Miguel opened his book again, a Bible, pages worn thin from constant use. "Have you ever considered that maybe you're fighting the wrong battle?" "What do you mean?" "You've been trying to change your behavior, your habits, your schedule. But what if the real problem is deeper? What if it's your heart that needs changing, not your routine?" I shifted uncomfortably. "I don't believe in that kind of talk. Hearts don't change, people are who they are." "Is that what you told your wife when she asked you to change?" The question stung because it was exactly what I'd said in different words. I'd explained to her that champions had to make sacrifices, that I couldn't just flip a switch and become different. I'd used logic and reason to justify why change was impossible. She deserved better than excuses. She deserved a man who could love her more than he loved himself. But you can't give what you don't have. You can't love others well when you're empty inside. I wanted to argue, to explain that I did love her, that I'd worked so hard because I loved my family, but the words felt hollow. The truth was I had been driven by something else entirely, a need to prove myself, to achieve, to matter. Love had become secondary to ambition. So what are you suggesting? That I find religion and suddenly become a different person? Father Miguel laughed, a sound full of warmth. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just sharing what happened to me. I fought with Jesus for 2 years before I finally gave up fighting. Fought with Jesus? I'd sit in that church every Sunday listening to people talk about surrender and faith, and I'd think, these people are weak. They need a crutch. I can handle my own problems. He shook his head. Pride is a terrible thing. Keeps you from receiving help even when you're drowning. I thought about my own pride. How I'd rather train 18-hour days than admit I needed help with anything. How I'd rather lose my marriage than acknowledge I might be wrong about my priorities. What changed your mind? I realized I wasn't fighting Jesus. I was fighting myself. Every time I tried to be better, to do better, I'd fail. Every promise I made to change, I'd break. I finally understood that the problem wasn't my willpower or my circumstances. The problem was me, and I couldn't fix me. The honesty in his voice was unsettling. I'd never heard someone speak so openly about their own failures. In my world, everyone pretended to have it all together, even when they were falling apart. So you just gave up? I gave up trying to be God in my own life. I finally admitted that maybe the creator of the universe knew better than I did about how to live. Maybe the one who made me could also remake me. He stood up and handed me a small card with the church's address. If you're tired of failing at the same things over and over, maybe it's time to try something different. I took the card, though I had no intention of using it. What makes you think I'll show up? Father Miguel smiled that same peaceful smile. Because you're still here talking to me instead of walking away. That's not coincidence. That's God trying to get your attention. I threw the card away 3 times that week. Each time I'd fish it out of the trash, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I had no business in a church. I was a man of discipline, logic, results. I solved problems through hard work and dedication, not through prayer and wishful thinking. But Father Miguel's words wouldn't leave me alone. Every morning, I'd wake up with the same emptiness, the same sense that something fundamental was missing. I'd throw myself into training, schedule back-to-back sessions, fill every moment with activity, but the feeling always returned. My trainer noticed, "You seem different lately, more distracted." He was right. I'd been going through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. For the first time in my adult life, achievement felt meaningless, success felt hollow. I kept thinking about what Father Miguel had said about fighting the wrong battle. That Friday, I found myself driving past the church where I'd met him. It was a small building, nothing impressive or intimidating. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching people walk in and out. They looked ordinary, not like the religious fanatics I'd always imagined. I was about to drive away when I saw her. My ex-wife was walking up the church steps with a friend. She looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She paused at the door and looked directly at my car. Our eyes met through the windshield, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen in years. Pity, not anger, not hurt, not even sadness. Pity. I drove home that night feeling more lost than ever. She had moved on, found peace while I was still sitting in parking lots, afraid to walk through a simple door. The woman who had once begged me to change had stopped caring whether I ever would. I called my brother. We hadn't spoken in months, but I needed to talk to someone who knew me before I became this. "You sound terrible," he said. "I feel terrible. What's going on?" And don't give me the usual everything's fine routine. I found myself telling him about Father Miguel, about the card, about seeing my ex-wife at the church. He listened without interrupting. "You know what's funny?" he said when I finished. "I've been waiting for this conversation for years." "What do you mean?" "I've been watching you drive yourself into the ground, alienate everyone who loves you, and convince yourself that more success would fix everything. I kept waiting for you to hit bottom." The words stung, but I knew he was right. So what am I supposed to do? Maybe try something different. Maybe admit that the way you've been living isn't working. After we hung up, I sat in my study, staring at the card I'd retrieved from the trash one more time. The address seemed to mock me, representing everything I'd always dismissed as weakness and superstition. But what if I was wrong? What if the very thing I'd been fighting against was the thing I needed most? Maybe it was time to stop fighting. Sunday morning came and I found myself standing in front of my closet, paralyzed by indecision. What do you wear to surrender? I'd never been in a situation where I couldn't prepare and strategize and control the outcome. I drove to the church 3 different times, circling the block like a stalker. Each time I'd find an excuse to leave. Too many people, not enough parking, I wasn't dressed right. Finally, I parked 2 blocks away and walked, figuring I could always turn around. The building was welcoming inside. People smiled and nodded as I found a seat in the back row. No one stared or whispered or made me feel like an outsider. I spotted Father Miguel near the front, and he turned around as if he sensed my presence, giving me a small nod. The service was different from what I'd imagined. No fire and brimstone, no guilt or manipulation, just a simple message about grace, about God's love for imperfect people. The pastor talked about how God specializes in changing hearts that seem unchangeable. Some of you have been trying to fix yourselves for years, he said, looking directly at me. You've made promises you couldn't keep, started routines you couldn't maintain, tried to be better husbands, fathers, friends, and every time you fail, you tell yourself you just need to try harder. I shifted in my seat, feeling exposed. But what if trying harder isn't the answer? What if the solution is to stop trying to be God in your own life and let the real God do what only He can do? The words hit me like a physical blow. This was exactly what Father Miguel had been trying to tell me. I'd been fighting a battle I was never meant to fight, trying to change myself through sheer willpower and determination. When the service ended, I sat in my pew while everyone else filed out. I didn't know what to do next, didn't know how to take the next step. I'd never been in a situation where I couldn't figure out the logical next move. Father Miguel appeared beside me. How are you feeling? Lost. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Nothing complicated. Just talk to him. Tell him you're tired of trying to run your own life. Tell him you need help. Here, now. Why not? He's been waiting for you to ask. I looked around the empty church, feeling foolish. I don't know how to pray. Father Miguel smiled. Neither did I. Just talk to him like you talk to anyone else. Be honest about where you are and what you need. He left me alone then, and I sat in that pew for another hour, wrestling with decades of pride and self-reliance. Everything in my rational mind screamed that this was nonsense, that I was having some kind of breakdown brought on by stress and divorce. But my heart was saying something different. My heart was saying I was exactly where I needed to be. Finally, I closed my eyes and spoke into the silence. Jesus, I don't know if you're real, but I'm tired of trying to fix myself. I'm tired of failing at the same things over and over. If you can change me, if you can make me into someone better, I'm ready to let you try. The words felt strange in my mouth, but also somehow right. I sat there waiting for something dramatic to happen, a voice, a vision, some kind of sign. Instead, I felt only a deep quiet, a sense that something had shifted inside me that I couldn't name or explain. When I finally opened my eyes, the church was empty except for Father Miguel, who was sitting in the front pew with his head bowed. He looked up as I approached. Feel any different? I don't know, maybe. It's hard to tell. It usually is at first. Change happens slowly, from the inside out. But now you're not trying to change yourself, you're letting God change you. That makes all the difference. I left the church that day with more questions than answers, but also with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope in my own ability to get better, but hope that maybe I didn't have to do this alone. The changes started small. I began waking up earlier, not for training, but to sit quietly and pray. I had never been one for meditation or reflection, but these morning moments became the anchor of my day. I talked to Jesus about my struggles, my failures, my fears. Most days I felt like I was talking to myself, but occasionally I'd sense something deeper, a presence, a peace that wasn't my own. My trainer was the first to notice. You seem calmer, less intense. He was right. The constant urgency that had driven me for years was beginning to fade. I still trained hard, but I wasn't training from a place of desperate need to prove myself. I was training from a different motivation entirely. The real test came when my ex-wife called. She needed to discuss some paperwork, and I braced myself for the usual tension and blame. Instead, I found myself really listening to what she was saying without planning my defensive response. You sound different, she said after we'd finished the business discussion. Different how? I don't know. Calmer, less angry. She paused. Are you okay? I wanted to tell her about the church, About Father Miguel. About the changes I was experiencing. But I was afraid she'd think I was trying to manipulate her or win her back. Instead, I just said, I'm trying to be better. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. This is the first conversation we've had in months that didn't end in an argument. After we hung up, I realized she was right. For the first time in years, I'd been able to have a difficult conversation without getting defensive, without making it about my ego or my need to be right. Something fundamental was changing inside me. The changes accelerated over the following weeks. I started reading the Bible that Father Miguel had given me, not looking for rules or regulations, but trying to understand who Jesus was and what he offered. I was surprised by what I found. Not a distant, judgmental God, but someone who understood struggle and failure and offered grace instead of condemnation. I began attending church regularly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The community there welcomed me without trying to change me or fix me. They just accepted me as I was while believing I could become something better. But the most surprising change was in my relationships. I started calling my brother more often, not to complain or seek advice, but just to connect. I reached out to old friends I'd neglected. I even had dinner with my ex-wife, not to reconcile romantically, but to apologize for the man I'd been during our marriage. I don't understand what's happening to you, she said that night, but I can see it in your eyes. You're not the same person. I'm becoming who I was supposed to be all along. I just needed help getting there. She studied my face for a long moment. You really believe this, don't you? This Jesus thing? I believe he's changing me in ways I could never change myself. I believe he's giving me a new heart, a new way of seeing the world. The old you would have laughed at someone talking like this. The old me was miserable. The old me lost everyone and everything that mattered because I was too proud to admit I needed help. She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. I'm proud of you for admitting that. It takes courage to change. I'm not changing myself. I'm letting God change me. That's what makes it possible. 6 months later, I stood in the same church where I'd first surrendered my life to Jesus, but this time, I wasn't alone. My ex-wife sat beside me, not as my romantic partner, but as my friend. My brother was there with his family. Father Miguel sat in his usual spot, beaming with pride. The pastor had asked me to share my story, to tell others about the transformation that had taken place in my life. I'd been nervous about it for weeks, but as I stood at the podium, I felt a peace that surpassed understanding. 6 months ago, I was a broken man. I had achieved everything I thought I wanted, but I was empty inside. I had hurt everyone I loved, lost my marriage, and convinced myself that change was impossible. I looked out at the congregation, seeing faces that had become familiar and dear to me. I was wrong. Change is possible, but not through willpower or determination or trying harder. Change comes through surrender. Change comes through admitting that we need help and accepting the help that God offers. I told them about that night on the bench with Father Miguel, about the months of resistance and pride, about finally giving up the fight to be my own savior. I told them about the slow, steady transformation that had taken place in my heart. The woman who divorced me said I'd never change. She was right, as long as I was trying to change myself. But Jesus specializes in the impossible. He changes hearts that seem unchangeable. He gives new life to people who thought they were beyond help. When I finished speaking, the response was overwhelming. People came up to me afterward, sharing their own stories of struggle and transformation. I realized that my journey wasn't unique. God was in the business of changing lives, one heart at a time. Later that evening, my ex-wife and I walked out to the parking lot together. You know what surprised me most about your story? She asked. What's that? You didn't mention your training once. The old you would have tied everything back to your competitions and achievements. But today, you talked about relationships, about becoming a better person. That's how I know this change is real. She was right. The things that had once defined me, success, recognition, achievement, had become secondary to what really mattered: love, service, community. I was still ambitious, still driven, but now I was driven by a desire to serve others rather than to prove myself. I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful that you found what you were looking for. You're finally the man I always knew you could be. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. It hadn't been easy. Surrender never is. But it had been worth it. I had found what I'd been searching for my entire life: peace, purpose, and the power to change. The man who had once believed he could fix himself through sheer willpower had discovered something better: a God who specializes in broken people, who takes our failures and transforms them into something beautiful. My ex-wife had been right. I would never change on my own, but she hadn't counted on Jesus, and Jesus makes all the difference. I was finally free, free from the prison of my own pride, free from the burden of trying to be perfect, free to love and be loved in return. The old me was gone, replaced by someone I was still getting to know, someone who was being shaped daily by the hands of the one who had created me. It was a new life, a second chance, a miracle I never saw coming. And it all started with a simple prayer on a bench outside a small church with a man named Father Miguel, who knew that sometimes the greatest strength comes from admitting you're weak. Jesus had indeed changed me, and I would never be the same.